For the record, I'm Gus Seward. I'm the director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board.
I'm Polly Major. I'm the policy director for VHCD.
So welcome. Thank you both for being here, and we look forward to hearing about projects completed in the works and plans for the future.
We'll do our best, and I know you're running late, but we'll do our best to.
I'll be here all night for you.
Wow.
I will be here all night for you guys. Just a chair.
So wow. Let me introduce myself by saying a couple things about VHCD and my own history, which is to say, I found myself counting that I've been in Vermont for 50 years, starting about 2 weeks ago. I came here to be a Goddard College student, joined the fire department when I was there, and then the East Montpelier Fire Department when I got out of college, which really gave me a graduate degree in Vermont. I went to work at Community Action, the organization you now know as Capstone. The last 5 years I was there, I was the director, but did many other jobs. First on the front lines with Head Start, doing outreach work. And back then, homelessness was not an issue in Vermont. I mean, it was a rare issue. And in fact, I was talking to Steve Dale this summer, and he was on the board of the Good Samaritan Haven in the early 90s. And he said, we had a steady clientele of 7 folks who were without housing in central Vermont in the early 90s. And in the last 2 years, we've added about 50 beds to Good Sam's capacity, and it's not enough. So things have changed over time in a big way. And I just want to start by thanking you for your diligence in focusing on this as a primary issue within a whole range of housing issues that includes the essential workforce that we depend upon to help people out of homelessness, because most of those folks don't make quite enough money to afford what's happened in our market, whether you're working in a mental health agency or a community action agency or one of our homeless service providers. One of their big challenges is workforce today because it's so hard to afford housing at so many levels. VHCB was created in the mid-1980s for a lot of different reasons. We have a dual mission that I'll go over in a moment. This opening slide is of the French Block here in Montpelier. It's about a 10-minute walk from here. And the upper stories of that building had been vacant since the 1940s, and now have 19 apartments, 5 of which are explicitly for people who've been without housing. And there's a service agreement with the Washington County Parent Child Center to provide services there. And that's one model for how we serve people who have been without housing. Down the street is the Transit Center, which is also an affordable housing development on what was once a contaminated site. It took the city of Montpelier 30 years to get the site cleared and for us to build housing there. I won't go into all the details of that. Here's our statutory purpose. And we're asked not just to build housing, conserve land, just for its own value, but we're specifically instructed that it's about the economic vitality and quality of life for Vermonters. And this is an example of how our mission has played out in the Rutland area over a number of years. But quite a number of years ago, we invested in West Rutland in a couple buildings there. And then along came the opportunity to conserve the West Rutland Marsh. And I'm not going to speak very much today at all about conservation, but this is a world-class area for birders and attracts people from all over the country and all over the world. So we always try to put an economic lens on our conservation work as well as our housing work. Below is Lincoln Place. That was a former Catholic school. And when we opened it, all the Rutland legislators showed up with great memories of playing CYO basketball in that building. And really, it is now 19 apartments, 10 of which are set aside as permanent supportive housing, which is one of the terms you'll hear us talk about. But that came about because we facilitated a meeting between all the providers in Rutland County saying we really need to do something. This was probably 12 years ago, before things were as bad as they are now. And this project came out of a meeting with Rutland Mental Health, the CAP agency, the Homeless Prevention Center, and the Housing Trust of Rutland County, which is now Cornerstone Housing. They are in the midst of building this building in West Rutland today. That's 24 apartments. They're going to break ground on 30 units on Forest Street in Rutland very soon. And they have a scattered site project, including 4 units for homeless vets over in Castleton that'll be underway. And they're also rehabilitating a building at the Vermont Achievement Center that used to be used by corrections, but they abandoned that program model. So,
I ran that. I started that and ran that.
well, thank you for having done that. I'm not sure it was a wise decision to end that, but that's,
It wasn't
that-
neither here nor there.
I'm happy to talk with you about that on a different occasion, but there'll be 86 new apartments that are going to come online in Rutland over the next 12 months or so. Here's a list of all the housing programs that we operate. I'm not going to go through this list. The building here that you see is one of about a dozen hotels that we've converted since the pandemic into housing. In this case, it's a new shelter for STEPS, the organization that serves survivors of domestic violence in Chittenden County. And what it did was to triple their capacity to serve folks. They went from 7 units to 21 with this facility. Big numbers. And this slide deserves a little bit of time, but I know that you're pressed for time. So over the course of the pandemic, you have invested a lot of money through the Housing and Conservation Board. And I should just take a moment to say, our job is to help purchase property or buildings, get them rehabilitated, or build new construction. The physical side of the dilemma that you're all dealing with, you're usually focused on the human service needs. And so this slide gives you a sense of all the different ways, from home ownership to rental housing to manufactured home communities to the expansion of the shelter system. And I don't think we've quite doubled our shelter capacity, but pretty close to it, 169 new beds. 2 of those facilities are yet to get under construction, but one in Brattleboro will be underway this summer, and another one in Hartford as well. We've been involved in recovery residences, and there are 4 projects that all of which should be up and running this spring. That'll provide 59 beds. And for those of you who represent rural communities, I just want to say that we've run for 35 years a program with the Center for Independent Living that's reached every corner of the state. So if somebody needs a bathroom modification or a ramp in order to stay in their home, they support that kind of work everywhere. To get more to the issues that you're focused on GA, one of the benefits of the network that we support, and most of our work, not all of it, is done by a group of nonprofit organizations that were established to do housing work in every corner of the state. And that's actually rare in the United States, that you have a rural state where there's a nonprofit that covers and can get services delivered everywhere. Those same organizations, 5 of them actually deliver the VHIP program to landlords. So they perform a lot of different functions. One of the things that we asked of them and you asked of us was they have an existing portfolio, and there was an executive order that Governor Shumlin issued, I think in 2016, that 15% of that housing be set aside for people who've been unhoused. And 2 years ago, you asked for that year to ramp it up to 30%. So over the course of the pandemic, they have taken in close to 1,600 households as turnover has occurred and as new units have come online. And that's been 36% of the units. And just to think about translating that into a budget number, if at the height of the pandemic, we were paying $140 a night for a motel, that would have been saving $222,000 a night. And for 100 nights, $22 million. If we had all the foresight in the world, we probably would have tried to figure out, and the federal rules, at least initially, wouldn't have allowed it, how to divert some of that money into actually building housing. But I do want to say again, thank you for how supportive you have been of getting housing built.
Yes, can I just ask a quick question? So there's always a question about, are we referring to the same people when we talk about households who experienced homelessness? It doesn't, from what I understand, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it accurately, because if I'm not, I want you to correct me. So it doesn't mean that they are necessarily homeless at the time that they are access one of the units. Is that correct?
My understanding for this group is that most of these folks came through coordinated entry or some other human service referral and were indeed, and I suppose it depends on what definition of homelessness one uses. So the feds have never allowed us in the point in time to count somebody who was doubled up with friends who were going to throw
Right.
them out. But none of these people, as I understand it, and I'm happy to double check with our housing director, had housing of it where they were the lessee or the homeowner. They were, and most of them, I think, came through the coordinated entry system or some other human service referral.
Okay, I was just checking that because I had understood previously that in the, prior to instituting the 30% deal a couple of years ago, that the definition was a little looser. And that could have been people who had previously been homeless and had previously were homeless or were tenuously housed or.
I will double check with our housing director, but my understanding is that these folks across the pandemic were people who were without housing. And there's been a lot of work on this subject.
Thank you.
I just want to also note, when I showed this slide at the legislative orientation, it was 140 less than it is today. So we're continuing to do that. That hasn't come without strain on the system that we work with. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but we've been able to get a philanthropic grant. And most of our partners have developed service coordination staff or departments. Champlain Housing Trust, being our largest provider, has a staff of 8 that do service coordination work, which doesn't mean they're necessarily providing services, but they're connecting people to services. In our statute, you will find that we are charged with making investments that will result in the asset being permanently affordable. And I just want to talk about the ways in which we think that that's really good public policy and important public policy. So the building on the left in Burke, Vermont was an old Section 8. The owners were ready to sell. If you think about the combination of the mountain being there and successive Kingdom Trails, the owner could have converted that property or sold it to somebody who did not want to keep it affordable. Not only did we have somebody come in and buy it, keep the Section 8 assistance in place, but also added 8 apartments there. The second slide is a development underway at the Old Catholic Diocese, the Old Burlington College in Burlington. This is the most mixed income neighborhood in the state. We've so far built 2 buildings there. Private sector is building other buildings. We're about to build 2 more buildings, or one will be more rental housing, the other will be affordable condominiums. But SD Ireland has just built condominiums with the best views of the water there, and those are selling for $3 to $4 million. So in that same neighborhood are people who have been unhoused, people who are in the workforce at low wages. If there was not a restriction on the investments we made for the public, if they were time limited to 10 years or 20 years, at the end of that time, this would just become an economically gated community. So when I talk about the importance of permanent affordability as a policy, what we're trying to do is protect the public's investment and recycle it as an asset from one generation to the next. Otherwise, people are just gentrified out of a neighborhood like this. And the last example is Northgate Apartments, the largest rental development we've ever been involved in, one that we helped back in the day of Jack Kemp as the HUD secretary, who believed in empowerment. There's now a nonprofit with a majority residents who've managed that property for 35 years successfully. We invested just under $3 million in 1989 in a $22 million real estate deal. If we had to replace Northgate today, we'd be talking about $170 million to replace it, just at current construction costs, if you could find a site for 336 homes close to the lake in Burlington. So we're preventing displacement, we're protecting the public's assets, and we're keeping communities being the integrated communities economically that I think we all value. Sir.
The Northgate, is that a co-op model?
It's not quite a co-op. We are authorized under our statute to work with co-ops. What it is a nonprofit with a majority of the residents on the board. There are also community members on the board, some appointed by the city, some relate to social service agencies. So there's a mix of both private and public people, along with the residents who manage the nonprofit.
All right, thank you.
I should also say, just, yes, please.
No,
ask your
oh,
question.
wait,
Yes,
go ahead.
Thank you.
is there Northgate? I just happen to know quite a few people that live there, and some of them make quite huge wages. So there's no income base. It's
There
just
is.
I happen to know what they make.
There are income limitations, but there's also, this is a mixed income neighborhood, so not all of the 336 units are restricted to extremely low income people. So it again is a mixed
Okay.
income.
I was wondering how
Neighborhood.
that worked, because I always thought it was for people that had like a lower income.
It's
Yeah.
mixed, I mean, I think, you know,
Income. Okay.
we actually try to have
Good
mixed income developments.
It's good to know that, though.
When you look at our entire rental portfolio, and again, we do mobile home communities, we do home ownership, but in our rental communities, the median income is $17,000. If we put aside people who are either disabled or elderly, and we're looking at working folks, the incomes are closer to $30,000 as the median income. So some above, some below that, and we are serving a large number of people on fixed incomes, whether it's a matter of disability or a matter of their age and retirement
So-
status.
They can make up to 100,000 and live there.
Would depend on family size, but I think that most of the units are restricted at a level that would probably be below $65,000, while there are other units that probably go up higher.
Again, it's good policy to have mixed income developments. I mean, it creates for more inclusive communities.
So Paula, do you want to talk a little bit about the slide on the shelter program and the
Sure.
recommendations?
Sure, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about our comments on H91. Also talk about the housing market, how we fit into it, and some of the programs that the HCD administers for vulnerable populations. So thank you for the work this committee is doing on creating an emergency temporary shelter program. Some of the pieces of this bill that really stood out to us as needed changes, we really support integrating the community shelters and the hotel motel program into a single program that's administered by a single department. I think we've seen a challenge in the bifurcation between those programs. We also support connecting households sheltered in the hotel motel program with services and having everybody come in who's able through coordinated entry. Coordinated entry is the program that the housers that we support use to rehouse people coming out of homelessness. They are engaged in that system. When we're looking at the eligibility for households in this, one of the things that jumped out to me was the requirement or eligibility requirement for an eviction, and a concern that there are some households that might leave their housing prior to an eviction because having an eviction on their record makes getting into housing, getting rehoused so much more difficult. So they could see increases of rent either due to just the market going up or due to expiring affordability covenants on the apartment they're living in, and might choose to leave before they have an eviction to protect their ability to get rehoused. I just want some consideration for the eligibility of those families. We also have worked with nonprofits who have purchased hotels and are operating them within the hotel motel program, such as CHT and Down Street Housing Community Development. I know you're hearing both from Chris Donnelly and Angie Harvin this week. And so having some sense from them about the perspective of a nonprofit hotel operator on this bill and how it's going to work with their model would be good. And then one of the things that we see, or our partners who are rehousing Vermonters coming out of homelessness see, is one of the indicators of success is when services are able to follow the tenant into housing and stay with them further into housing than just, I believe it's the 60 days or 90 days that is a part of the requirement, I think, of the HOP program. And so wherever we can have services follow a tenant and stay with a tenant, that's where we see the best success. So thank you again for working on this bill. So VHCB's role in the homelessness system is on, as Gus said, on the physical side of it, the buildings. And we look at how permanent housing prevents homelessness. We look at how we can support the shelter system to the size that it needs to be to ensure that everybody is sheltered. And then on the other end of that system, ensuring that homes are available for people who are exiting homelessness. And so there's a balance there that our state is looking at of how many, if we increase the number of permanent homes available, we prevent people from entering into homelessness and we create a better exit ramp for them. And so we can reduce the number of shelter beds that we need in the state. The other choice we can make is to increase the number of shelter beds, but then we run the risk of not having a place to transition people out of. And so as we're looking, VHCB is investing both in shelter production and in housing production. And we did an analysis looking at the state investment through VHCB in these different housing types and what that looks like in terms of how much it costs the state versus how much it costs to develop. So I'm going to walk through this chart for a second. What you're seeing here on these bars are the total development costs for different types of projects. And then in the blue, you're seeing the state investment. In the light blue, you're seeing the federal investment. And the yellow, you're seeing other sources of leverage, the majority of which are going to be private equity through tax credit programs. On the left-hand side, we see shelter projects like Tim's House, the Welcome Center, and the Fairfield Street Shelter. Far over on the right side, you're seeing permanent housing, Riverwalk Apartments, Reed Commons, Marble Village. And so you're looking at shelter costs less to build overall than permanent housing, but the cost to the state is roughly equivalent as the cost of the state to build housing. So as we're thinking about where we're putting dollars, a dollar of state investment can either create a shelter bed or a home. It's roughly equivalent because there's more sources of leverage to create homes than there are shelter beds.
And so I guess my question is, so when I guess some of our legislation has been specific, allocating dollars to shelter, and some of it hasn't been specific, but that's one of the eligible uses. Where do you folks think that we are at in terms of shelter capacity in the state?
I wish we were smart enough by ourselves to answer that question. And I think it has been clear to us that we needed to add shelter beds across the pandemic, and we're still short. And at the same time, if I can spend $150,000 and create a shelter bed, or I can spend that same amount and get an apartment, there's a better long-term payback to actually creating the apartment, but it takes longer. So it takes longer to raise the money. It takes longer to do the planning, to go through the permitting. So I think we need to work with you who are hearing, and people in the human services community and our own partners to just figure out what's the right balance. And I wouldn't claim, 4 years ago, if I'm thinking about Lamoille County, we were told that if we could just add 50 apartments, in 2019, 5 years ago now, we would wipe out homelessness in Lamoille County. Well, things changed. So over the last 2 years, we've opened 50 apartments in Morrisville and opened a 21-bed shelter in Hyde Park, about a mile from the junction of 50. And we're still not close to serving the need. We need to do both at this moment. I think we need to ask ourselves, if we do shelters, how much are we going to have to continue to support them? And how much, with limited dollars, do you want to invest in the shelter system? And how much do you want to invest in the longer term solutions? And we don't answer that question.
Nobody does.
We want to work with you to.
Representative Eustace?
Well, one thing that I would just like to comment on, that I'd like to learn more about the yellow, about what all that means. Maybe now's not the moment, but it strikes me that there's a stronger blend of multi-energies coming in to create housing, which actually feels like it might benefit communities in a certain way more than more to the left, where there's less involvement from the community.
And the very quick answer, Polly mentioned, there's something called the low-income housing tax credit. There are other tax credits like the downtown credit that Vermont supports, the reinvestment tax credit for historic buildings. So most of that leverage is coming from those kinds of deals. Those dollars are generally not available for shelter projects. And that's the difference. And unless you're in the Upper Valley, where there's a great fundraising capacity, and especially in the course of the pandemic, where people said to us, hurry up. We basically said, okay, we need another shelter in central Vermont, and we paid 90% of the cost of the shelter here on the Barry Montpelier Road. We did the same thing in a number of other locations because we needed the beds that quickly.
Representative Donahue and then Garofano.
I assume you probably, you would have the numbers. It probably would be helpful on this chart if it also referenced how many units each of those have, because obviously it makes a big difference. Also regarding the investment, if one of these has, 10 units, another has 100, the per unit cost.
One thing I should clarify is that these are broken down by the per unit cost.
Oh,
It does say that.
okay. I thought it was the total.
Yeah, no,
I
it's
thought it was
very
the total
costly.
cost.
It's very costly to produce perpetually affordable housing.
Okay. No, that's.
It's
Thank
why
you.
it's why we're in this struggle of how much do we invest in VHIP and how much do, we don't want to take away from, because I think people understand what you were just, saying to us, that this is protecting the public investment for a lot longer. But it's also not very quick, just judging from my own experience in Waterbury, it's taken us 3 years to get to groundbreaking. And, so trying to have the balance of shelters, of permanently affordable housing, of things like VHIP and the mobile home infill, and with limited resources, how much do we put in each is, honestly, it's been a little bit of a guesstimate about how much goes in which bucket, and are we achieving what we want to achieve when we make that investment.
And when we're looking at costs, again, we're seeing that the leverage amount, that yellow amount, is highest when we're building homes. So when we're putting dollars into creating permanent affordable housing, we're bringing money into the state to do so.
My question is, and I'm guessing you won't have an answer, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. Is there any work or any thoughts here or across the country about when we're building shelters, can we think about building them where they can be converted later to affordable housing? Like, could we do anything at the planning stage so that if the need, because that's the other piece of the balance, right? If we're investing all this money into developing affordable housing, which will come online in time, will the need for shelters decrease? That's the hope.
Right.
That's what so then will we need the shelter space? And can we do anything as we're thinking about developing all those to kind of make that transition easier and not have just buildings that were shelter, but have a building that could later become an affordable apartment?
So that is one of the lenses that we are looking at. So there is a building on the Williston Road that used to be a ho-hum
I know it.
hotel. And that we helped CHT buy that in the midst of the pandemic as a place for people with COVID to go and isolate. And then it was turned into an emergency facility, and now it's become 20 apartments. So that's one of the lenses we look at when we look at a property for acquisition. I can't tell you that that is going to be true of every single shelter, and the one on the Barry Montpelier Road, I have a hard time imagining that that's an easy conversion into, into independent apartments. But every building's a little bit different, and it's one of our evaluation criteria when we help somebody buy a facility.
Did I miss somebody over here? I know, I thought I saw a hand up on this side first. No? Okay. Representative Steady.
What happened to the whole hum, the old hum on Shelburne Road? I noticed it was developed for homeless and they had little apartments, and I noticed when I went by this last week, it's closed down.
I'm gonna have to get back to you that on that. I had not heard that it was closed
I
down.
officiated a wedding there, the old hum.
Being converted in Bainbridge.
Are you talking?
So maybe we could take this off.
If you're talking about,
I'm just curious.
if you're talking about Harbor Place in Shelburne, they're doing redevelopment at Harbor Place into a 94 unit neighborhood, and we helped them buy another hotel on the other side of Route 7 where they moved the Harbor Place activities into.
No, but that's okay.
If you're talking about Beacon Apartments, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noticing the time and to move us through this. So, quickly just say that there's a lot of housing need in the state, and just as we look at those raw numbers, if we need 24,000 to 36,000 homes, we really need to think about homes that are affordable in order to address the needs of low and moderate income Vermonters.
Before you leave that slide though, if you just look at the blue bar at the top, if we only build housing, people who have the most income, we will have no impact on the concerns of this committee. So that's one of the dilemmas out there when you hear people say, let's just get housing built. That's not going to help us get anybody of modest means housed. We can build $500,000, $600,000 houses all day, and it won't get to your goals or ours.
And this just reiterates that the households that are really bearing the burden of our housing shortage are those who are at the lowest income and the spectrum. And not only are they the most rent, we have the most number of households that are rent burdened, but also the severity of burden. They're paying the highest percentage of their income towards housing, leaving next to nothing left over to meet other essential needs. And what we're seeing here are the low and moderate income households that VHCB programs are tailored to serve. As Gus mentioned, VHCB's housing programs are serving Vermont's workforce, especially the workforce that you were talking about earlier, to provide services. So community social service occupations, nursing assistants, mental health counselors. These are professions whose average wage would qualify people to live in housing that is supported through VHCB investments. So to talk a little bit about work that's happening now, we're opening this year, 100 new units have opened in Hartford, and you're really seeing the range of types of housing that VHCB is supporting here. So 747 Hartford Avenue is homes for people exiting homelessness. That's really tied to those services that Upper Valley Haven offers, and is right next to the Haven shelter. Mountain Vale Apartments is a conversion of a hotel that is a large piece of our work over the past several years. Riverwalk Apartments are permanent homes that was developed in partnership with a private developer who developed and built the building, then turned it over to a nonprofit to support it in perpetuity. We try to tailor programs to the needs of populations. So there are several types of housing that the HCB supports that meets specific needs, understanding that people can need targeted housing in order to be successful in housing. So you've heard us talk about the shelter investments and working on increasing the size of shelter in the state. My apologies, I'm going very quickly just because I know we're out of the time.
You're fine.
Permanent supportive housing. So this is a model that's been highlighted around the country as something that can really be successful in supporting households. And it's where you have services that are really deeply integrated into the homes and available to the tenants. So this project here Cott's Main Street Family Housing is on the same lot as their family shelter, and it is a place where households can transition out of the shelter into housing while still having that support. And this is a model that we're helping developers build and operate around the state.
I'm just gonna make a point about permanent affordability here. The site where Cots has its family shelter was originally a project we did with a Y. A decade went by, the director was gone, the whole board was gone. The Y said, oh, we've got a building on Main Street in Burlington. Let's sell it for $900,000. And Cots, Rita Markley really wanted that building. And we said, that's fine, Rita, but there's a covenant on it. It's restricted. They can't sell it for $900,000 to anybody. And she ended up getting it for under $400,000. When a new place decided they could no longer operate the Champlain Inn, their board thought, and the director had left, oh, well, we have an asset, a nice asset in Burlington, we'll just sell it. So again, no. And between CHT and CVOEO, we rescued that as a, continue to be an opportunity for people to be sheltered.
We touched briefly on recovery residences. We've helped support 4 projects around the state to create 59 recovery beds. And this development is working closely with Vermont Fort Foundation for Recovery and other service providers to, so you have the housing developer be the, own the building, develop the building, the services go hand in hand with the partnership with the service provider.
Seeing Bennington makes me think about the Bennington Hotel project that was on again, off again, on again, off again. Is there anything happening with that project?
Last I knew, the fellow who thought he could buy it never got a purchase and sales agreement. So we ask him periodically.
I guess I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about resident service coordination.
So, as I said, the integrating close to 1,600 households who've been unhoused over the pandemic has come at a cost to property management, it's a strain. And so our partners have more and more invested in the development of their own resident service coordination programs. They're not trying to provide services, but they're trying to direct people to service providers and connect them. And we just got a $3 million philanthropic grant it's $1 million a year for 3 years that will help that network increase its capacity and service coordination, probably by about 1/3 across the state. So there'll be 10 folks doing this work. We have a consultant who also worked on Family Sash, working with us on program design, on how we're going to evaluate success. For all of our partners, though, and I think this is part of the value of investing in a nonprofit network, when they have to evict somebody, they feel like they've failed. So we're looking at, and you've talked a lot today about eviction prevention. We're looking at how do we help people stay housed, and that's part of the value of service coordination. It's particularly given the strains on the social service system today that this committee knows better than I do. Really important because sometimes you call the organization that works with people struggling with their mental health. Sometimes you call the people who are with the domestic violence organization and they're just struggling with their own staffing. As you heard Polly say, the HOP program stays with somebody for a short period of time and then they're on their own. So this really is a program that's designed to help strengthen the delivery of services, to connect people better. There are some things people will do in this program, like community building at a site, just to get people working together in one building or in a neighborhood that might not happen with a social service agency. So we see that as an important function beyond information referral. And then there are times that people are just absolutely in the same way this committee is befuddled by the overlapping service agencies sometimes. How you do your housing paperwork and get qualified and stay qualified can be confusing for people. There are some people who are hoarders and you just want to help them with those kinds of problems so they don't lose their tendency. So we'll be reporting to you on how this goes, but we think it's an investment that if you're a houser, you feel like you've just got to make if you're going to be successful, which means you're going to avoid eviction. The fellow you see pictured here is somebody who had been homeless in Rockingham. He moved into the old garage in Bellows Hall that was renovated this year. He has become the life of the. He's there at game night every week, and I just want to read to you something he told folks, but about how grateful he was to get housing. But he says that things could have turned out differently. And his quote is, "As it is right now, I need a transplant. I've come a long way, believe me. Everything is good as long as I don't drink and as long as I maintain my health. That's pretty incredible considering that 6 years ago, they only gave me a 25% chance. That's what housing can do. If I wasn't where I am right now, I know my health would just go downhill." And that's, I'm 3 steps away, 4 steps away from the day-to-day, but I think this is why we do our work, is for folks like this all the time. Chair spoke about a project that took way too long to get started in downtown Waterbury. The Homes Act, I think, helped because originally the DRB voted against permitting this project. It's under construction. For those of you who are as old as I am, it's apparently, and I didn't know this until the groundbreaking site where Rusty Parker of WDEV fame had his home. And it'll be 26 terrific apartments when it's built. 5 of the apartments will be for people who have been unhoused. 3 of them will be for people whom you've worked with from the IDD community, and Upper Valley Services will be the service provider. This is one of 4 projects that we've been supporting over this year with that community. The other 3 were the pilot projects that you had identified. And there is funding.
Good Sam, I was gonna say, Good Sam is going to be supporting the
That's my
folks who are exiting homelessness.
That's my understanding of it, yeah. So we think this is a great outcome in a great location. And again, when you think about, well, there's a picture I showed you in downtown Montpelier where you're a 3-minute walk to Shaw's and a 4-minute walk to the library, and to access tons of jobs. The same thing when you get to live in the heart of a community that's as vital as Waterbury has become over the years.
And the DRB didn't like the design. I mean, that's what it really came down to, honestly. It came down to that.
It was the height of the building, as I understand it. that bothered
It's right across from a 4-story building, so.
As I said earlier, we've worked with VCIL on a program to provide ramps and bathroom modifications for 35 years. Over the course of the pandemic, over 400 households, we were able to double their funding. This is housing that we just broke ground on last summer, and you can see it's making great progress in St. Albans. So when we get through the financing and the permitting, the actual building of these developments of this 33 apartments is usually 12 to 15 months for a project of this size. And it'll be, this is part of the TIF district in St. Albans. It's one of the things your Housing Committee and Commerce Committee is looking at, is whether to expand TIF for housing, which I think is a really valuable tool. We've funded about 150 of the 270 homes in the TIF district. We do have a program that we've operated from HUD for 30 years to make housing lead safe. We can't get all the lead out, but we can make it safe. And that's really important because lead poisoning leads to permanent cognitive delays for young kids who absorb too much of it. For those of us who are older, the damage is done, but for kids under 6, lead is a real problem. This is the permanent affordability through home ownership. And again, I know we're out of time, but this woman lost her husband, needed housing, has 2 disabled kids, and through the shared equity home ownership program, was able to find a home close to her church and near downtown Barry. We really think this is a great way, again, for people to pay it forward. When the average, we've had about 50 to 60 resales of homes each year, and those homes are generally come back on the market for less than $160,000 and in good shape.
I think the last point you make on there is a pretty telling one. About the percentage of renters financially able to buy a home.
that just speaks to how difficult the housing market has become. And, you know, some of that is interest rates. If you could wave a wand and get interest rates back to 3.5%, maybe you get up to 12 or 13%, because that's such a powerful tool. But, you know, I know the value of my home has just about doubled since the pandemic began. And we invested very little to get that doubling of value. And that's true. It's great for all of us who are homeowners, and it's terrible for all of us who are not. Last thing I just want to leave you with, just in your capacity, not in this committee, but as legislators, and we didn't talk about our conservation work at all today, but we do have a program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative, which provides grant writing for small towns and businesses in small towns. One of those that we helped recently was the Brandon Library, win a grant, and they were able then to put in a lift. And this fellow, who's been a customer at the library for years and years, is able to not have to sit outside the building or right in the front door and ask people to get books. He can actually now use the library. So make our phones ring if you're representing a community that you think can use that kind of grant writing assistance.
Gosh, you're so good at tailoring your presentation to the members of the
Yes.
committee.
Giving us the opportunity to work all over the state, and sometimes the investments can be visible. You know, I'm not sure who on the committee represents Milton as an example, but conservation investment we made some years ago was Eagle Mountain, which I think is a great, you know, it's still there. It's going to be there in perpetuity. It goes to the value of making a permanent investment, whether in housing or conservation. We made an investment in that elderly development right with a fire station some years ago. And those are the things we try to do.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Oh.
Yes, can you just, in a couple of sentences, the governor's budget is recommending the full funding from property transfer tax, as I understand it.
That's the good news.
Okay,
And the bad news, if we were looking at it, is because of the availability of ARPA and one-time funding, our housing budget next year, even if we allocate at least 60 or 65% of it to housing as opposed to our other work, is going to be at least 70% lower than the average of the last 4 years. So,
we're not going to be able to recreate ARPA.
no, I'm not suggesting you can.
But what do you have for that? The second part of my question is, what do you have for projects in the pipeline above that dollar? So if you knew today, 100% of the projects that you have in the pipeline that have applied and that you think are, you know, potentially eligible for funding.
So we have about $13 million left this year with $37 million of applications coming in. You added $8.5 million in the Budget Adjustment Act. See if the Senate follows course with you there. So that's going to help. And we expect today at least $50 million more in applications next year. So there's more applications coming at us than we can fit. And what is going to happen now without more resources is that developers don't want to spend money on permitting, on architectural, on engineers, on optioning land if they think they're not going to get their deals done. And so things will slow down. That slide Polly showed a while ago of the large yellow, we were able to use something called a 4% tax credit to build 1,000 homes over the last few years. That's a virtually unlimited federal tax credit for Vermont. So our ability to bring that capital in is going to go down if we can't figure out as a state whether we're going to continue to make perhaps not the same level of investment of the last 4 years, but a larger investment than our formula funding would allow us to make otherwise.
Great. Any other final questions go ahead, Rep. Cole.
Well, thinking about the market and that we're selling and buying fewer houses right now because of cost prohibitives, being tied to the property transfer tax is kind of a tricky situation as well, I feel. And so, I don't know, maybe do you have some thoughts for the committee based on those numbers? Or that change and compared to other years?
Well, what I'd say to you is, we are tied to the transfer tax by statute.
Yeah.
That in bad times, what the legislature has done or a governor has done has been to ignore that
Mhm.
and write the word notwithstanding in the Appropriations Act. And in good times or surplus times, you've actually given us more than that formula. I think the transfer tax reflects what's going on in the real estate
Yeah.
market, so we like that. We just think that the problem of housing in Vermont has gotten so much worse that it probably requires an additional tool in order to adequately address whether we're focused on just building rental housing, providing home ownership opportunities, addressing the needs of the IDP community, adding shelter capacity. Whatever it is you want to do, it really is something that requires capital. And we think that one of the ways to address that is to, and this is actually in our statute, to leverage the monies you give us as much as possible
Mhm.
and get you a return on investment. So these are difficult times. I think all of us are worried about what's coming at us from the feds, but we also know that the provision of services that this committee oversees can't happen well if people do not have hope. If you think about just being a diabetic and not able to refrigerate your medication, you're really putting people in harm's way, or they are in harm's way if they can't refrigerate medication. So we have to figure out how to better address that. I think you've taken a bunch of steps on the regulatory side, a bunch more have been proposed, and all that helps. But regulation alone, we have another slide we showed of this 94 unit development in Shelburne, and permitting is 2% of the total project cost. So you're not going to gain, if you eliminated all permits, you're not going to create affordability just by getting rid of permitting. It's going to have to take capital to get there.
All right. Well, on that note, we appreciate you both being here this afternoon, and it's actually helpful to see the progress that is being made and has been made, because we kind of sometimes get stuck in the rut of feeling like, oh, God, we're not making enough progress fast enough, and it still feels that way. But seeing that we actually are making some progress, and we can see some of the numbers of people who've been, helped to have more permanent housing that's affordable, I think it gives us the hope that we need to kind of keep going on and looking for solutions. So really appreciate your role in sharing that with us today.
We all need hope.
Yeah.
We all need hope, and the people that we're here for need it too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Okay, folks, that's gonna wrap us up for today, right? Unless I didn't do the agenda correctly, which, has happened occasionally. Tomorrow morning, we're going to be convening at 9, continuing our testimony on H91. And we will also have some folks from Recovery Day here in the afternoon. So it's a full day tomorrow. We have a lot of different witnesses. So I think we're all set, Lori.